Hey guys, welcome back to another installment in my series of some other games that I play. This isn't actually a game, this is a spaceflight simulator called Orbiter Spaceflight Simulator. And this is actually the 2010 version. There's a 2016 version that I also play, but there are certain mods that aren't available yet for the 2016 version, so I like to play both versions when I want to use certain mods. But basically, let me unpause here.
Welcome aboard, Commander. All systems nominal. External cooling online.
Change the HUD color. Oops. Wrong key. So Orbiter Spaceflight Simulator is exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to fly to space. It models the solar system, so you can fly to any of the planets and a lot of the moons too. You can use realistic spacecraft like the Space Shuttle and a lot of the SpaceX vehicles, or you can use futuristic type craft like this one I have here, which is the XR2 Ravenstar, which is an add-on modded vehicle. I like this one because it has futuristic engines, so it's a lot more powerful and you can go more places, whereas if you use the Space Shuttle, it's very weak in comparison, and it's an orbiter. I mean, the shuttle is an orbiter, so that's all it can do is orbital operations, so you can't go to other planets with it or anything like that. So with this little craft here, I can get up in orbit, I can go to the space station, I can go to the moon, I can go to other planets, other moons of other planets. So let's get back in here. I thought it would be fun to go to the moon. So that's kind of what I have planned here. I've already picked, it's kind of hard to see up here in the top right, a date to go to the moon, Wednesday, August 2nd of this year. It looks like it's almost 6:30 GMT. Oh, no. Midnight 18 GMT. And the reason I chose that, if I bring up the moon here, I want to change the projection. There we go. I chose this date because, well, let me explain what's going on here. This yellow line is the orbit of the moon. This green dot here in the middle is the Earth, and we're on the Earth, obviously. And the moon is here in its orbit out here. This line shows where it is in its orbit, which is the yellow line out here. And it's actually about 45 degrees before it gets to its ascending node. And the reason we're taking off now is because we're going to do an off-plane transfer to the moon, which is the same way that NASA goes to the moon. It's better to do it that way because it saves fuel. You don't have to make a plane change to get there. You can just take off at a 90-degree heading and fly 3.5 days to the moon. By the time we get out there, the moon will have moved over to that position, and then we can encounter it with a low relative velocity in order to save fuel. So that's the reason I chose this date, and you can do that. You can do an off-plane transfer 2 times a month, or 2 times a lunar cycle to be more exact. You can go and arrive at the ascending node or the descending node, which would be 180 degrees the other way. But in this case, we're going to arrive at the ascending node. This craft is able to take off horizontally like an airplane and then get up to orbit that way. There's also, can't really see it too well, but up here where my mouse is, there's a launch pad up there, and I have a heavy vehicle launcher which I can mount this craft to and take off vertically, kind of like the space shuttle. But I thought it might be fun to just manually fly up into orbit for this demonstration. And it might actually be funny too, because I haven't flown in a while, so. And it should be said that this simulator program has a very steep learning curve. I mean, not even just the flight characteristics and manually flying it and controlling it and, knowing what, knowing what all the buttons and everything are for, but also being able to calculate your trajectories, learning how to use all of the different MFDs that you have available for space flight. And actually, I want to go back onto well, I'm already on orbit. I want to take the target off. So basically, we're going to take off and get up into about a 200 kilometer orbit. So we'll be 200 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, and then we'll set up the TLI bird, or Trans-Lunar Injection Burn, to fly out to the moon, and then we'll head to the moon. But this view of the orbit MFD, the gray line is the surface of the Earth. We are here on the surface, and then this green ellipse that you see here, as we accelerate and get into orbit, that will expand out and eventually wrap around the Earth to show our, I guess it's technically a hypothetical, no, it would be our actual calculated trajectory around the Earth in orbit. But I don't need to get too technical about that because you don't really need to know. What I do need to do is turn off my
using onboard O2.
My external cooling. I'm going to turn on my APU.
Pitch on.
Turn on my control surfaces. Do a little sanity check here. And I think we're ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and start adding some power.
$100 knots.
And I'll talk a little bit more once we get off the ground and get into kind of a stable ascent.
V1. Rotate.
Alright, there's the rotate call out. We'll go ahead and rotate. Put the gear up.
Gear up.
I didn't mean to change the HUD. Set my trim so that I'm not jumping all over the place. Alright, now that the gear are up, I'm going to go ahead and throttle up a little bit. We can take a quick look outside and you can see what's going on here. We took off, but I can't look out for too long. I only want to climb at about 30 degrees for now, so let me get that trimmed out. And up here, kind of in the top right, we're looking for an altitude of about 20 kilometers, 20 to 25, and then I'm going to level off for a bit because I want to increase speed up to Mach 2. We're about to hit Mach 1 here. And max Q. Throttle up a little bit more.
Mach 1.
Okay, we just hit Mach 1. I'm going to go ahead and go with throttle up to full throttle. I'm going to change, if I remember how, change the color of my HUD to something that's a little bit easier to see. There we go. My nose nose is dropping a little bit, so let's pitch up a little bit. And the reason I'm going to level off at around 20 to 25 kilometers is because this craft in particular uses Scram engines. So once I get to around that altitude, I can turn off the main engines and use the Scram engines,
Mach 2.
which are much more fuel efficient. And I'll engage those right around Mach 3.5. So there's 20 kilometers. I'm going to start leveling off. If you want to see what's going on here. We took off from way down there. Level off a little bit quicker than that. Alright, my extra tank, which is inside my bay, is now empty.
Mach 3.
There's Mach 3. Coming up on Mach 3.5 here, so let me fix the trim. I'm going to go ahead and open the Scram doors. Bring up the Scram thrust and get rid of the main engines. Okay, let me fix my trim again. I did get a little bit high, so I'm going to let it descend a little bit,
Mach 5.
but not too much because I'm going to start heating up. If you look down here in the bottom middle, you'll see my temperature is increasing over here. If I get up into the red, I can blow this whole thing up here, so
Mach 6.
I have to be really careful that I don't do that. If I look outside, you can see we're heating up.
And Stephanie, nice to hear your voice.
But I can't look outside too much, otherwise I'm going to do something really stupid. Okay, my temperature's sitting just below the yellow, so I don't want to increase my altitude too much. So I'm going to level off again, so I can get good efficiency from my Scram engines.
Information. APU fuel 90%.
Okay, and real quick before my temperature goes too high, you can see down in the bottom left here, this green,
Mach
well, it will
10.
become a circle and eventually it will wrap around the Earth once I have an orbit. Okay, now it's going to start getting a little dicey because I'm heating up,
Warning. Hull temperature.
so I'm going to have to pull up a little bit.
Mach 11. Warning. Hull temperature. Warning. Hull temperature. Warning. Hull temperature.
Redlining it right now.
Hull temperature.
Okay, the temperature's starting to come back down. That's good.
Mach 12. Warning. Hull
I can go ahead and let it settle back down a little bit. And trim the nose back down. Because I still don't want to climb too much. I just needed a slightly higher altitude, where the air is less dense. But at this point I don't really want to descend, so I'm going to try to zero out my vertical speed here if I can.
Mach 14.
That's pretty close. Okay, we're already doing Mach 14. We're starting to heat up again, so I'm probably going to have to increase my altitude again here pretty quick.
Warning. Hull temperature.
There we go.
Warning. Hull temperature.
I'm going to pull back a
Mach
little bit.
15. Warning. Hull temperature. Warning. Hull temperature.
Because if I get too hot, the ship will
Warning.
disintegrate.
Hull temperature. Warning. Hull temperature.
We're coming up on 49 kilometers above the
60.
surface. Okay, we're cooling back down. And this looks pretty good here, so I'm just going to hold this ascent profile for a little bit. Maybe I'll bring the nose down a little. Can take a quick look outside and see we're still pretty warm.
Mach 18.
Okay, my scram fuel is down to about 10% left. Once that runs out, then I'll close the scram doors and re-engage the main engines at full throttle.
Mach 19. Warning, scram fuel low.
Okay, about 3% left. Okay, it's about to shut off.
Warning, Mach scram fuel depleted.
I'm going to close the doors. Go full throttle on the main again. There we go. And now we're high enough where we don't really have to worry about heating up too much.
21.
We're at Mach 21. You can see on the bottom left here how this circle is, or how our orbit is progressing. That's what the circle represents.
Mach 22.
I need to watch my APA number, or my apoapsis number. Currently it's 70 kilometers. I want to stop it. Well, my goal is to have a 200 by 200 orbit,
23.
but I need to stop it a little bit early because I'll still have some aerodynamic lift until we get outside of entry interface. But I'm going to start throttling down a little bit because as we reach orbital velocity, my orbit will start to grow really quickly. Okay, about 120 kilometers it's at. 130. I'm really backed off now.
25.
Less than 10% of thrust. I'm probably going to kill the engines right around 180. Right about there. And that will continue to climb because although there's hardly any air up here, but there's still enough air to give me lift. So even though I'm not accelerating, my altitude is still coming up. We are physically at about 76.5 kilometers above the surface, but our highest point would be 182.5.
Mach 26.
And you can see how this green circle is almost wrapped all the way around. It's above the surface here, and actually on the other side it's below the surface by 63 kilometers. So we will have to make an orbit insert burn once we get to apoapsis in order to raise our periapsis up to 200. And I am going to add a little bit of main engine.
Doors are closed.
A little bit of main engine just to get that up a little bit higher because I undershot a little bit. And the dynamic pressure outside is 0.2 kPa. Static pressure is 0.003. So I'm not gaining any more lift. So I'm going to go ahead and put it to 200. 200.1. I overshot a little bit, but that's okay. So the apoapsis, that'll be the highest point of our orbit, and then once we get to there, we'll raise the other side of our orbit. Otherwise, if we don't do anything, we're just going to fly around the Earth, and then on the other side, we're going to re-enter and crash. Once we get physically to 120 kilometers, we will be outside what is known as the entry interface. When you're re-entering, once you get below 120 kilometers, then you're considered inside the atmosphere. So once we're at or above that, I have some other tasks that I need to complete. We are slowing down a little bit, and our APA has dropped below 200 kilometers, but it's still fine. Okay, we're coming up on 100 kilometers above the Earth. Let's go ahead and take a look outside. You can see where we're at. We're just coasting along here. We're actually over the Pacific Ocean, heading east.
Mach 26.
Okay, the static pressure outside is now 0. Dynamic pressure is 0. So I'm going to go ahead and open our radiator. And if I zoom in out here, you can see the radiator will be opening up here on the back of the craft. And what that does, well, specific to this craft, not all of the spacecraft have radiators, but this one does, and it is simulated. So if you don't open that in order to radiate the heat from the electronics, they will eventually, the coolant will eventually get up into the yellow and the red, and it will fry your computer, and then you're screwed. So, all right, we're at about 111. We're getting pretty close to being outside of entry interface, so I'm going to go ahead and switch the HUD over to orbit, and I'm going to
Pitch. Information.
turn off my control
APU
surfaces because they're
70%.
useless in space because there's no air.
Rotation.
And I'm going to turn on my rotation RCS thrusters. And go ahead and turn upside down because I need to eject my external tank. Little hesitation in the program there, probably because I'm recording. Okay. Get my nose sort of back on the center line. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to go to this upper panel and go to the payload camera view, which shows me the top of
Information. APU running.
the top of the craft. I'm going to go ahead and open my bay doors and select my fuel tank, and I'm going to set a rate of half a meter per second to go ahead and eject this out into space. So we'll go ahead and deploy
Payload
it.
deployed.
That's my empty fuel tank. Go ahead and close the bay doors. And I can go back down into the other view, and let's look outside. You can see that I deployed that tank. It's going to float away from us. And it's good practice to get rid of that because it's just extra mass that we don't need to be carrying around with us, of course. And then I can turn off the APU because we don't need any hydraulic pressure. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn into the prograde position, which is just a reference position used for making orbital maneuvers and burns. Alright, so we are in our initial orbit. I'm going to turn off that autopilot and we should stay pretty much where we're at. So basically that tank that I just ejected is going to continue all the way around, re-enter the atmosphere and burn up and crash. That isn't going to happen to us because once we get to our apoapsis over here, we're going to go ahead and complete a burn to bring up our periapsis altitude up to 200. So I'm going to go over on this MFD here and open my burn calculator. And I'm going to set it to apoapsis and I'm going to hit circularize. So in 816 seconds, it's going to burn for 3.865 seconds the main engines in order to circularize our orbit so that we don't die, basically. And we don't have to wait the whole 800 seconds because you are able to use time warp in here. So I'll go out to 10x time warp. And then it only takes 75 seconds. And if I go to 100x really quickly, I can get it down really fast. There we go, we're down to 75 seconds. If we look outside again, you can see we're coming around to the dark side of the planet. About 54 seconds before the burn, and I will need to be in the prograde position when that burn happens. So I'm going to turn on the prograde autopilot again so that it holds me on the proper excuse me, I had to take a drink. Holds me in the proper orientation for when the main engines fire. In about 20 seconds. It's going to be a really quick burn, 3.7 seconds. And if you watch over here, you'll see this green line come out. 3, 2, 1, and burning. There. Now our orbit is 192 kilometers by 191 kilometers. It's basically circular. I'm going to turn off the autopilot. So we could orbit the Earth indefinitely for probably a really long time before we had to make any type of a corrective burn. If I bring up the map over here and I change our orbit lines, you can see we're basically going right around the equator. And we're coming up to South America over here. We're also on the dark side of, or we're coming around on the dark side of the planet, so we're not really going to be able to see anything yet. Oh, and actually, there's the moon. That's where we're going. And as you can see, we're out of plane with the moon, so you would think that the moon would be up here or something. But we're going to arrive at the moon's ascending node, so we don't need to be in plane with the moon. Well, that looks kind of cool. Sunset is turning my ship kind of reddish. Alright. So, the next step in getting to the moon is we have to calculate a trajectory to the moon. And there are a couple of different tools that we can use to do that. One is TransX, and the other one is Interplanetary MFD. And there's actually a third tool called, is it Transfer? Yeah, Transfer MFD, which comes with the base install of Orbiter when you download it. And I think for our purposes here, because we're not really learning how to do this, I'm just going to use Interplanetary MFD. It's a little bit easier and less complicated for you guys to follow along. use target intercept. I'm going to target the moon. And then I'm going to make some adjustments to our arrival time in order to find the least amount of delta V or energy that we need to use in order to get there, which basically means we'll be using less fuel, and in this case I'm going to have to back it off. So let's, oops, I don't want to do that. I want to adjust this to 10. Oh, maybe not 10, that's too much. I'm just trying to get to the lowest fuel I see, or the lowest delta velocity that I see. And then I'm going to jump up here and make a finer adjustment. That one I'll do on 10. Okay, that's going up. Alright, looks like the lowest was 3,210 meters per second to get to the moon. So we'll go ahead and use that. Now that burn is going to take place in 4,602 seconds, and it's going to burn the main engines for 159.2 seconds. We're not going to wait once again for that 4,000 seconds to pass. That's a long time to wait, so I'm going to go ahead and warp time forward at 100x. And we'll get closer to that time to burn. I'm going to drop down to 10x for a second here. So if I go back to the orbit, see, now we're coming around the other side of the planet. If we hadn't fixed our orbit, we would re-enter the atmosphere and crash. You can see some of the lights on the planet out there. Alright, let's speed up. Whoop, sped up too much. Sun is coming out. And the sun is always out. We're just coming out of the shadow. And we'll get a little bit closer to the time to burn. Okay, we're about 600 seconds away from the burn. About 10 minutes. Alright. Now we're 50 seconds away. So I'm going to go ahead and let the computer carry out this burn. And it will orient the craft for me and burn on in the correct orientation to raise our orbit and head to the moon. We can look outside here and see what's going on. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but it looks like we're over an ocean. If I bring up that map again, we're back over the Pacific again. So we basically went all the way around the Earth, and we're right in the middle of the Pacific. But I want to switch back over to orbit, and I'm actually going to change to this view. Okay. The computer automatically started firing the engines, and you will see that our orbit is going to grow. If I go ahead and target the moon, let me, okay, we can watch as our orbit grows out. It's going to grow out this way toward the ascending node of the moon, because the moon is still over here. You don't fly straight to the moon, because it takes 3.5 days to get there, and the moon will move about 45 degrees around the Earth in 3.5 days. It's kind of hard to see, but this orbit's getting a little bit bigger. I can go at a 10x, so we can get through this burn a little bit quicker. I'll go back to real time. So you can see our orbit is growing out, and it'll stop. Right about there. So now we're going to come out here and follow this path all the way out to the moon's orbit. And by the time we get out there, the moon will have moved over there. So let's go back in the cockpit here and turn on the HUD again. And once again, we're not going to wait 3.5 days to get to the moon, but if you want to, you absolutely could sit here for the whole 3.5 days, and there are people on YouTube that do that, and they simulate like the Apollo missions and stuff like that, and they do everything in real time, and they'll take the full 3.5 days to get out there, but we're not going to do that. So let me just warp time out to about 100 times so we can get out away from Earth a little bit. I'll go back to real time and we'll look outside here. Where's the Earth? There's the Earth back there. That looks like South America, all lit up in the nighttime. And go ahead and speed up again and watch ourselves leaving the Earth. Not sure what those hesitations are in the program. Go out to 1000x and see how fast we're leaving. Just fix the view a little bit. Well, you get the idea. Let's go back in the cockpit here.
Translation.
We go ahead and rotate the craft a little bit. Use some time warp. Actually, I just saw, this is kind of a major waste of fuel, but I just saw the moon over there. There it is right there. That's where we're going. Might as well just go ahead and point right toward it as we get closer here. Alright. Go back to 1000 times time warp. 10,000 for a little bit. We're not quite staying on in the correct orientation to see the moon, but as you spin a little bit, you have various gravitational fields acting upon you even when you're out in space. So even though we wouldn't be feeling any gravity because we're above orbital velocity, you're still having the effects of gravity. Even from Jupiter, we have effects of gravity on Earth. 1000x, 10,000x. Moon's getting a little bit bigger in the window. Okay, I'm going to slow back down to real time for a second here. I want to switch over to this other view, and you can see it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's a green line right here, and that's where we are in our orbit. So we're over halfway to the moon at this point, and you can see the moon moved from over here to there, which is also about halfway before it gets to where we're going to meet it. Oops. But before I get too close, I want to switch over to a different program within Interplanetary MFD. I want to reference the moon. I want to target Brighton Beach. And then I want to set my altitude at the moon to 20 kilometers above the surface. And I want to approach for a orbit insert. So Brighton Beach is a fictitious base on the moon. It just gives you some place to go on the moon so that you can go and land there. You can actually build your own bases and do all that kind of stuff too, but when you install Orbiter, Brighton Beach is one of the bases. Throughout the universe, there's actually a base on Mars, or not the universe, but the solar system. There's also a base on Mars called Olympus when you fly out to Mars that you can land at. So we're going to go to Brighton Beach, but we need to correct our course because this green arrow is where we're actually, here, let me change this projection a little bit. This green arrow is actually where we're going, and the blue arrow is where we want to be, so we need to make a corrective burn. You can do that manually, but once again, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to let the computer do it because it's much faster. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. So we're going to go ahead and burn. It's going to be basically a 62 meter per second burn, so not a very big burn. Probably less than a kilogram of fuel. And if you looked down in the bottom left corner, you can see now our actual trajectory lines up with the way we want it. And the way we want it is to be lined up with Brighton Beach. We want our altitude to be 20 kilometers above the moon when we get there. And that's basically it. And then once we get there, we'll have to perform a retro burn in order to capture the moon's gravity and get into orbit around the moon, and then we'll slow down and land. But let's look outside here for a second again. Oh, there's the Earth way back there. The moon is, there's the moon. There it is. It's actually below us. Even though there's no up, down, or anything in space.
Translation. Rotation.
But just to have something to look at, I want to point the craft toward the moon so that we can see our progress as we get closer. There it is. Normally I wouldn't do this because it's a waste of fuel, but since you guys don't really know how all of these different calculators and planners work, it's easier for you to visualize what's going on. So let's go ahead and warp time forward again at 1,000, actually a little bit of 10,000. You can see we're getting a lot closer now. I'm going to have to make another corrective burn. I'll just let the computer do that. And this is a very, very simplified way of getting to the moon. You can be a lot more precise and accurate. You know, down to maybe 10 kilograms of fuel. But we're not trying to do that in this case. And I might be able to, let me get rid of this target. We reference the moon. Put this up on the HUD, and I want to see if it will, no, it's not going to orientate me correctly, so we're not close enough yet. So I'll have to manually orient the vessel. There's the moon. We're getting pretty close. That plus sign with the circle around it is our trajectory. That's where we're headed. So we'll get lined up on that a little bit. Warp time forward again. Okay, this is at 1,000 times speed. Let me go back to real time for a second here. You can see in our mission elapsed time, it's been 3 days, 7 hours and 10 minutes since we took off. We are now under the influence of 69% of the moon's gravity, so we're getting pretty close. I want to get in a little bit closer, and then I'm going to do one last corrective burn. Let's get a little closer. I want to get closer to like 85 or 90. Okay, that's pretty good. Let the computer make another adjustment. Okay. Now we should be close enough that the autopilot should be working now that we're close enough to the moon. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the prograde position. Use a little bit of time warp so we get there quicker. And I'll go to 100x, so this is 100 times actual speed. And I believe I can see our landing site. I think it's right up in here somewhere. But we're going to go all the way around before we land. Oh, I'm still in the prograde autopilot. That's why it's jumping all over the place. Sorry about that. Okay. Let me go back to real time. So just like when we got up into orbit around the Earth, we need to get an orbit around the moon, but it's instead of firing our engines to increase our orbit, we're going to fire our engines to decrease our orbit or decrease our velocity so that we can get captured by the moon's gravity. And I'm just going to go ahead and use a tool in this same MFD, to do that, which is actually, it is under the course program. Orbit insert. Because we need to slow down. Let's take a look outside. We need to slow down, otherwise we're just going to we're going to sling right by the moon and it's going to send us right off into space in some, well, it's not a random direction, but it's an unknown direction because we're not planning on doing that, so we wouldn't know where we're going to end up. So in 2,322 seconds, the computer is going to perform a retrograde burn to slow us down so that we can get captured by the moon's gravity. So let's go ahead and speed up to 100x and get closer. And I'll just go ahead and let the computer, the onboard computer, do all of those calculations and do everything for us. Okay, it's going to orient us in a second here. Let's go back to real time so that you can see what's going on. Well, actually, let me go forward a little bit, get a little bit closer because it's still over 100 seconds. Get down to about 20 seconds and then I'll go back to real time. There we go. So basically, we're pointed backward to our, in relation to our direction of travel, and we're going to slow down. Let me change the projection on here too. Okay, it's burning, and if you watch, actually let's go to this other view. If you watch over here, you'll see that the orbit is closing in around. We just got captured by the moon's gravity. And it's going to continue to burn until we have an APA of about 20 kilometers. It's not going to be exact, but it'll be close. 20.03 kilometers, and our lowest point is 19.89 kilometers, so it's pretty close. So we are now in orbit around the moon. Now our next order of operations here is to land. So in order to land, we need to slow down again. We need to remove all of this velocity. Right now we're traveling at 1,670 meters per second around the moon. We need to get that to 0 if we want to land somewhere. So I'm going to bring up a couple of different things here. On the left side, I'm going to bring up my navigation, my communications and navigation settings. And I'm going to look at my references here. Not Cape Canaveral, I want Brighton Beach, there we go. So I need the VOR transmitter frequency, which is 116.3. Oops. And that's a long-range VOR transmitter, so when we're within 500 kilometers, we'll get a signal from that, which will give us some situational information. And then on nav2, I'm going to set up the frequency for landing pad 1, because we're going to land on landing pad 1. That's 132.20. Okay. So that's all set up, and then I'm going to switch over to my VOR VTOL MFD, and we're on the first frequency here, and then over on this side, I'm going to pull up the map. I'm going to reference the moon. So this is a map of the moon. This green line is our orbit around the moon, and this green crosshair is us traveling around the moon. The lighter shaded area, I shouldn't say shaded, but the lighter area is where the sun is shining, and the dark area is where there's shadow, and obviously we can see there's shadow outside. We're on the other side, on the dark side. I'll go ahead and target Brighton Beach. Brighton Beach is over here, so we're going to fly all the way down around here, come out the other side, and land there. So let's go ahead and get a little bit closer. I'll go out to 1000x. Oh, that's really quick. Back down to 100x. You probably can't see it down at the bottom, but we're about 1,000 kilometers from the base. We're about 600 now, so I'm going to go back to real time for a second here because I need to make some calculations. Once we're within 500 kilometers, this will populate over here and give us information about how far the base is away, what direction the base is, what's our closing velocity, all of that kind of stuff. But I need to bring up my burn calculator again because I need to calculate when I need to start burning in order to eliminate my 1,670 meters per second of velocity so that we can land. So when I enter that in, it says I need to burn the main engines when I'm about 60.442 kilometers from the base, and then I should stop directly above the base. So I'm looking for about 60.5 kilometers, and then I'll engage the main engines. Let's go ahead and warp tank forward just a little bit there. Okay, just populated, so we're 417 kilometers away from the base. It's at 180 degrees, so it's directly behind us, or depending on how you look at it, directly in front of us. We are at 19.93 kilometers, And we don't really have any vertical speed right now because we're in orbit and we're not slowing down yet. So I need to turn to the retrograde position because I need to be able to burn opposite to my direction of travel in order to slow down. So we'll get that all lined up, and while that's happening, I need to bring up one of my autopilots here, down in the bottom, which is my descent hold autopilot. I'm going to kill that autopilot, zero out my rotational velocity. And basically what this is going to do is allow us to slow down without falling too quickly. So I'm going to set it to about 150 meters per second, so that once we start slowing down and our vertical descent speed starts increasing, the autopilot will kick in and fire our hover engines so that we don't crater into the moon. I need to turn on the APU. I'm going to open the retro doors, the hover doors, and the landing gear.
Gear down. Gear down and locked.
Okay.
Translation. Rotation.
Now I want to rotate so we are in the correct orientation. Basically belly down to the moon. We're starting to get pretty close. We're only 200 kilometers away, so I kind of need to do this a little quicker. And I need to be facing backward. Alright, so give you a good idea what's going on here. My gear is down. We're heading backward toward the base. And if you're confused, don't feel bad. There is a very steep learning curve with this simulator. I'm going to go ahead and engage descent hold out autopilot because that will hold my correct orientation. 130 kilometers and closing. And remember, when I'm about 60.5 kilometers, I'm going to engage the main engines, and I'm going to let the computer do it by hitting the burn button down here. And then things will happen pretty quickly. "90 kilometers. "70 kilometers. Getting ready to burn in right now." Okay. I can look outside quickly. So you can see we're burning against our direction of travel, which is slowing us down. And the base is going to be down in this area somewhere. But I need to be able to see what's going on, so you can see our velocity up here is slowing down. That'll eventually get close to zero. It won't be exactly zero because we also have some vertical velocity, but I'm going to change the HUD over to surface. Now we're within 14 kilometers of the pad, or the base, so I'm going to change to nav 2, which will give me a more granular or zoomed in view of the actual the pad itself that I'm going to land on, so that I can get lined up. Okay, we're only 3 kilometers away from the base. If we look out here, should be able to see it down there. It is. The base is right down there. Our speed is almost zero. Alright, speed is zero.
Rotation.
So now I want to rotate so that the pad is in front of me. If you look in the bottom left, this plus here is where the pad is. This yellow arrow is the direction we're going, which is away from the pad, and we're falling right now too. So there is that. So I want the base to be in front of me, basically, or the pad to be in front of me. And then I'm going to just touch my engines here
Translation.
so that I'm headed toward the base and toward the pad, because we want to land on the pad. We don't want to just crash into the moon. I'll add in a little bit more forward velocity.
Rotation.
Rotate a little bit.
Translation.
Okay, we're falling at 150 meters per second. We're not quite lined up with the pad yet, but this is what's happening, so that you can see there's the base down there. I'm going to turn on the APU so that my parking brakes can engage once I touch down. I'm going to put a little bit more forward velocity in.
Rotation.
Oops, I didn't want to rotate.
5,000. Translation.
Start slowing down because I'm getting
4,000.
closer to the center of the pad. I'm going to switch it over to auto land.
3,000. Rotation. 2,000. Translation. 1,000. 800. 600. 500. 400. 300. 200. 100. 75. 50. 40. Rotation. 30.
I like to rotate so that I'm facing the building in the middle of the
15.
complex here.
10. Translation.
Getting a little bit off center, so let me try to get a little bit closer to the center of the pad.
3.
3 meters above the surface.
2. 1. Wheel stop.
There we are. I'm only less than half a meter off the center of the pad. And here we are at Brighton Beach on the surface of the moon. And if I zoom way out, like way out, you can see where we are on the moon. There's the moon. And Earth is around here somewhere. Let's see if we can find it. There it is. There's Earth in the background. But yeah, so I figured it might be fun to show you guys a little trip to the moon, even though that was not very in-depth. You can be a lot more in-depth with this program. You can fly to all the planets and do slings and do like a grand tour like Voyager, and fly out to all the planets without even pretty much using hardly any fuel at all. But yeah, so that will end my second installment of other games that I play. And let me know if you want to see some more of this. If you are interested in Orbiter Spaceflight Simulator, just look it up on Google. It's a free download. All of the mods for it are free. I'm sure there's some paid stuff out there too, but for the most part, everything you need and everything I use is free. So it can be a lot of fun, especially if you're interested in learning about astrophysics and orbital physics and that kind of stuff. You could spend the rest of your life and not learn it all, but you will learn a lot. So I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Later.